Good afternoon and welcome to the formal meeting of the Greater Lincolnshire Combined County Authorities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Andy Quarmby and I'm the independent chairman of this committee. Also in attendance are the committee's vice chairman, Councillor Philip Roberts. There are no planned health and safety issues, so there are no planned fire drills. If the fire alarm does go off, we'd ask to clear the chambers through the rear, meet in the car park, and then wait for further questions. The meeting is being streamed live, and all your comments will be made accessible online after the meeting and can be reported by the media. With this in mind, I would like to welcome and note that there are no members of the public. I can remind everybody to ensure that their mobiles are off and are silent for the duration of the meeting. The hearing loop is now being activated. Your forbearance, any requests to speak should go through the Vice Chair and he will make a note of the questions. Now move on to the formal agenda. We've got any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Jane King from South Holland District Council.
And no deputy? No deputy. To the floor, declaration of councillors' interests. Are there any declarations of any conflicts of interests from regarding to any of the items on the agenda? Do any members wish to declare an interest? Moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of September of this year. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The minutes can be found on pages 5 to 8 of the agenda pack. Has everybody had an opportunity to review them? And if so, do we have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer is Councillor Mitchell. And any seconder? Councillor Kane Parkinson. Could we... Apologies for the... No, yeah. With the surname like that, you should, yes. Could we have a vote then, please? Anybody? Oh, apologies.
I hope that's what is working. In the last meeting, Chair, we talked about the economic case for the transport plan, and I see that in the minutes it's like noted, and I thought we had a consensus that it would be put into the transport plan. I just want it clarifying whether noted means that.
My interpretation from them was it was to go to be included in the transport plan because it was effectively the longer timescales relating to how long it would be to actually release, draft, prepare and release a plan. So yeah, noted means it will be included.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to a vote over the minutes. Yeah. Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Can I accept those meetings as a correct record? So we now move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Greater Lincolnshire Local Transport Plan, a proposed work programme and scope of ambition, which came out of the last one. The report, which is for policy development, was on pages 9 to 14 of the agenda pack, and it will provide an update of the development of that local transport plan, which is due for consideration by the Transport Board on the 12th of November. Any comments? I believe we now pass it over to Lana to...
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, this report sets out the 5-stage process for the development of the local transport plan. It sets out the progress made on each of those stages, given the work previously undertaken on the LTP Light and in the period since the last Transport Board. The report sets out the need to map stakeholder and public engagement, as well as the indicative timescales for each part of the work programme to come forward. The report sets out what members can expect to see at the end of each quarter, and this will continue to evolve as the work develops. There's a commitment from all constituent authorities and the combined authority to deliver this policy at pace. There's a requirement for the Mayor to bring forward a local transport plan for Greater Lincolnshire, and as agreed at the previous Transport Board and Scrutiny Committee, members will be regularly updated on progress of the policy development, and this report brings forward the first of those updates. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the floor? One question from Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I see that the time, I note the timeline, and I'm not questioning that as such. I just want clarification on, as the transport plan's been developed, do the constituency councils carry on with their transport plans, and do they have the funding, or is that, how's the funding work while that transition's going on?
I'll pass you over to Lan on that one.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So actually this will probably come up in the finance paper, which is also part of the agenda today. But essentially in terms of the policies themselves, so we produced the LTP Light before the combined authority came into power. So that's the policy that we're working towards at the minute. And then obviously we're working towards the adoption of the formal Greater Lincolnshire Local Transport Plan. In the interim period, there will be finances to the combined authority to undertake that transport planning work, but that will be done in partnership with all of the constituent authorities.
Happy with that? Question from, sorry,
Councillor Wells.
Sorry, Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Question in terms of the transport plans. From what I understand, it's obviously that each constituent member will deliver their own delivery plan effectively. How local is that plan? The reason I ask that question is because the county of Lincolnshire is quite large. You're talking some 700 plus thousand people, and there are different communities within that county area. So how local is it going to be? How are we going to be able to meet the needs of residents across the county? Because the issues that residents will face in villages are very different to the issues that people face in places in Lincoln, for example. So how is this transport plan going to be able to cater for the needs of the wider community, given that Lincolnshire is so vast?
I'll hand you over to Lana in a minute, but I think on page 11 it does actually mention about stakeholder engagement. So that would be a view to sort of bring in the collective ones to discuss the massive variance of requirements, demands upon any transport plan. But
Thank you, Chair. I think you've answered that for me.
Oh,
but
I'm
just
impressed.
to say that the Greater Lincolnshire Local Plan is obviously the strategic plan, so it will be setting high-level strategy, themes, and an overview. And we will then be working with the constituent authorities, as well as the Chair says, stakeholders and local residents in terms of what will actually be delivered on the ground. And that will be an evolving process as and when funding becomes available and as and when priorities are identified.
happy with that?
Just one supplementary,
One
if I may,
supplementary.
Chair. So when we say stakeholders, are we saying that the current district councils are classed as a stakeholder in that process?
Absolutely. So stakeholders will include residents, businesses. It will include the constituent authorities as Lincolnshire, the district and city council that sit within that area. So as well as officers and members within those areas as well.
Any further questions from the floor? I'll have one if I could. It's a 18-month plan. what happens if it slips, and what are the key risks to that timescale?
I think the key risks at the minute will be in terms of capacity within the combined authority and within each of the constituent authorities in terms of delivering this. But since the last meeting, there's now a dedicated transport lead within the combined authority. There's also a clear commitment from each of the constituent authorities that this is a priority, not just for the combined authority, but for those constituent authorities. So there's a dedicated resource from within each of those authorities to work on this programme. So in that sense, as long as we continue to have that dedicated resource, then I think it's a time frame that's achievable.
Okay. One omission that's in part of the later funding plan is a lot of this plan will be delivered by third party when it comes to implementation. Could we have some sort of input into it to ensure that there is oversight of the third parties, because that appears to be missing in some of the current projects?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll ensure that that's built into any assurance frameworks or
Okay.
any governance arrangements.
Any further questions? So, are we content with wrong government department. We've reviewed the update and request that officers and Transport Board take into consideration the comments and feedback as captured by our scrutiny officer to support the development of this plan. Can we have a show of hands if people agree with that? Unanimous. Thank you very much. That is agreed. We move now on to item 5, which was the local transport funding. This report is for policy development again and is covered by pages 15 to 22 on the agenda pack. It provides an overview of the proposed allocations for the local transport funding, which should further address Councillor Wilson's comments from earlier, and is due for consideration at the Transport Board on the 12th of November. The final report to the Transport Board, which was circulated to the committee yesterday as supplementary information, contains several amendments to the information published in our report and are highlighted in yellow. The recommendation to this committee is to review and comment on the proposed local transport funding allocations for this financial year, to determine whether support for the recommendations below that are intended to be put forward before the Transport Board, which are approval of this financial year's allocation of the local transport resource funding and the approval of the approach and principles of the allocation for that funding in the following financial year. Report will be presented by Debbie Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair mentioned, you will have received a revised paper through, and I just wanted to run through the changes to make sure that everybody is clear on them. So the first change was at point 9, where the figure for GLCCA has been revised. The next change is on page 4. We've moved the table across onto page 4. And then also on page 4 at number 17, we've just amended the wording in the paragraph, although nothing substantive has changed in there. And then moving down to points 19 and 20, what we've done there is we've expanded on the details of the principles for the allocation of funds and also the developing guidance that will accompany all the decisions made around funding allocations, and those will be brought back to this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any questions from the floor? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is in relation to the local transport funding, and I'm just wondering if you can tell us what mechanisms there are in the plan to ensure some equity of investment in transport across the entire Greater Lincs region.
If I'm able to take that,
Oh,
so
go ahead.
sorry, Ruth Carver, Deputy Director, Combined Authority, and apologies for the paper being amended in between sending it out and receiving, and that's because it's the policy and development that we're taking forward to the Transport Board next week. But hopefully we highlighted it really clearly in kind of yellow so that you could see the changes and it was easy to adopt. In terms of that point, for this financial year, in terms of the capital funding, the equity was achieved by using the existing DFT ratios to passport the money across to the constituency authorities. And that has been the case for the revenue funding as well, because there's two, when we're talking about local transport grant funding, there are two pots of money. One is a revenue pot and one is effectively a capital pot, and they've both been utilised with that funding. The proposal for next financial year for the capital pot is that as the combined authority is a transport authority and the monies come to the combined authority, then proposals will be sought from those local authorities, the constituent authorities, indicating what their schemes will be so that we can have assurance over that funding. And then, which has been set out in the paper, it talks through the principles of those, which is the policy and development, and also the assurances in that particular space. So it's a similar approach next financial year. It's just that we've got the combined authority in that particular process, assuring and directing proposals.
We had Councillor Parkinson asking before.
Thank you, Chair. It talks about the proposed principles for the allocation of the local transport fund, which I understand all the points here, but when it talks about reducing transport emissions, improved air quality, so does that mean that all the services, new services, for example, will be working towards net zero, or all the vehicles we may have will be electric? Can I just clarify what that means? Is there going to be money spent on replacing existing vehicles? Sort of what does that actually mean?
So for this particular pot that we're referring to, the local transport grant, that is about usually about improvements to the highways. So that's often scheme enhancements, so small scale schemes, or it can be contributions to larger term schemes on the highway. So the criteria that we are proposing to use for assessment of those schemes is fitting with the rules. So DFT really strongly set those rules and a guidance notes, which is yet to come, but based on last year's guidance notes, they give really strong criteria. Also deliverability, and then also, you know, kind of assurance of, you know, project management and how that will kind of work through and value for money. We are also saying in that strategic fit side that we will use the emerging local transport plan that we've just referred to previously to use those criteria. If that fits within that, that would be one of the considerations on strategic fit. We are not specifying at this stage, because we don't have a detailed local transport plan, what that actually means in terms of those areas that you spoke about. It would be one criteria that would be considered in strategic fit, which is probably one of three larger criteria.
Are you comfortable with that response? Next question is from Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Page 19 caught my eye, and that's 5% of the fund being retained by the authority to build what's called internal capacity. Not a great deal of detail there about what that internal capacity is, whether some of that 5% is intended to be passported back to the constituent authorities for particular schemes. And the thing that concerns me, of course, is if you're involved in highways, how long it takes to get a scheme shovel ready with the contractor resource. You've got to plan very early. You've got to book your resource very early. Otherwise, within that fiscal year, it doesn't happen. So to be able to support the 5%, I think we need to understand a little bit more about it, how it's going to work, and what's going to be passported back to the authorities. Thank you.
Any response to that?
Can I come back in? So specifically for the, I think, 25 million, which is the local transport grant, then the proposal is that the combined authority retains 5%, and that would be for mayoral strategical priorities in line with the local transport plan. it's a small amount. It's 1.3 million out of the 25 million that we're considering, and it will go through the same process, assurance process, that is set out in the principles and criteria. So strategic fit, deliverability, value for money, and assurance in line with those proposals. So we will be submitting our proposals just as constituent authorities will be submitting their proposals, but it will be quick wins utilising in line with the local transport plan.
Just to clarify then, this money will be completely retained by the Mayor. None of it will be passported to authorities unless a scheme that the Mayor decides fits within the transport plan will then be given the funding. Or is it for constituent authorities to make proposals to utilise that cash, if you follow that?
Are we still on the 5%
Just the
line of
5%
question?
part,
Okay,
yeah.
that's fine. That
The rest
helps,
I
doesn't it?
understand the rest. It's just the 5%
Yeah.
is a bit of a question mark, really.
Yeah, the 5%, well, it's the same criteria as so we're a transport authority in our own right as a combined authority. So we have 4 transport authorities, and we're saying that for this next year, that would be 5% retained by the combined authority, not for capacity building as the previous paper stated, because it's capital funding. It will be for a scheme that we will work with constituent authorities. We are a strategic authority. We will not be delivering that particular scheme. But if we do not bring schemes forward that fit that, then the wording says that it will be passported back to the constituent authorities. So there's a kind of a get out there.
Content with that answer? I think so. Thanks. Slightly complex, but yeah. It does raise the issue. Councillor Davison did raise the issue of how to implement or shoehorn the resource into financial years. I've seen many projects where monies have been lost or there's been a panic in the last quarter of a financial year. How do we reassure ourselves that the work is not rediverted to meet contractor timescales and continues to meet the purpose for which it was actually procured?
I think this is a question for us, Section 73, on the assurance processes and the timetables, really, that we're going to give decisions on at the December budget.
Thank you. I think it's like any programme that we'll be delivering, it will have tight guidelines around it. So it'll have a business case, it'll follow Green Book rules, Magenta Book rules over risks. So we'll have the full suite of controls that you would expect with any programme, and it will be tightly managed to ensure milestones are hit. And we will try and align the payments with the milestones to make sure that we've got that as well.
And if anybody's got any concerns, we can always drag it back to this meeting. Yeah. Happy with that? Yeah. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. First one on the 5%, so I'll carry that theme on. I want to know how the 5% came about, that amount, because it seems like a round number. I also want to explain within that 5% how cross-border, if you like, between the constituency councils, highway schemes will be delivered.
So the 5% was a figure that was discussed that would be a small scheme and a small amount that wouldn't make a huge amount of impact. So with 95% going across to the constituent authorities, it was a small amount that was considered for mayoral strategic priorities. Because of the emerging local transport plan and because of Transport for Greater Lincolnshire with ideas about how to improve transport across Greater Lincolnshire, it was deemed that a small amount, and it is a small amount, that would be allocated for strategic priorities for the mayor and the combined authority. So it was a consideration of, you know, taking as little as possible out of that local transport grant, but actually having a small amount to be able to do something flexible and innovative, working with the 3 constituent authorities to develop proposals and deliver those proposals. Okay. It was also a subject of discussion over a number of months connected to working with officers about how the finance would work from a finance kind of work stream perspective, and 5% was deemed acceptable.
Chair, so
Yeah.
what I'm worried about exactly is that the actual 5% might not be enough. Greater Lincolnshire's travel across the area, in my view, is very poor. You know, no motorways, no, you know, etc., etc. And I wondered if a strategic thought about how we get around the county, the larger county, whether that 5% was enough actually. So that my thoughts are, that's why I asked that question. So the answer was a little bit disappointing that it was just a small amount.
So you think that they should be taking more money from
Well, what I think, Chair, my thoughts are that instead of like going for 5% right now, they should do some research on what's needed, and then for the planning, because that's what that's for, more than delivery, and then for the planning for any bigger schemes, sort of you know, have a better idea of what the actual need, instead of just saying, oh, we'll just take 5%. Because that was my suspicion. It's just like, we'll take 5% as a small amount just to get us going. But, you know, perhaps that's what's needed, 5% to get us going, but then that will enable the authority to have a look at maybe bigger projects in future. So it'd be nice to get a comment on that, whether that's the case.
Having done some work many years ago about recruitment of teachers to Boston, linking into the Boston bypass for getting people to commute to it, I share your concern about the sheer cost of any transport process. All I can suggest is your comment there about it being a figure that has been come to, and share your comment that it may be just a seed figure in a line that may be grown later.
Yes, I think it's fair to say, I mean, many of the members today have talked about the long development process that takes with schemes, particularly on that kind of highway. And we were, you know, really aware that even if you were, you know, started something or started planning for that, you know, in the next 6 months, it wouldn't come to fruition for a number of times. So, you know, we've really recognised that our role as a strategic authority, there will be schemes that we will work with constituent authorities in the much longer term, but they won't be ready for next financial year. So,
Okay.
at this stage.
Can I ask my next question?
Of course you can.
So in the other paper, I mentioned about economic drivers for the transport plan. Yet on page 19, and we mentioned it at the last meeting, which was noted,
Yeah.
on page 19, section 20, it's not mentioned. I think. Hang on, I've got the right section, sorry, I might have turned over. On the it's on the principles, I got the wrong ones, sorry Chair, I've turned over. So my apologies. On section 18, the principles of allocation, my apologies for the members there. The last sort of paragraph, it's not mentioned about the economic drivers for transport.
Well, it hasn't been specifically mentioned, but I think it's might be fair to say that detailed breakdown and measurable outputs and outcomes, if the combined authorities corporate plan identifies this, then it would fit in with those outputs. Is that correct?
Chair, can I make a recommendation that we actually ask for a specific line on that rather than rely on other
I'll pass you to the author for that.
other plans, so it's clear to the public and other people that that's part of the planning going forward.
Just through you, Chair, just to say that those came from the LTP Light, which was the light touch document that was produced in advance of the combined authority coming into power. So the economic drivers that were mentioned at the last scrutiny panel will be built into the full local transport plan, so will be one of those priority areas going forward.
I do appreciate that and accept that, but actually, you know, on this report, if it, is this going to the Transport Board, or is this just for scrutiny? If it's going to the Transport Board, I think it needs mending. If
It goes to the Transport Board, yeah. It
yeah.
will be going to, so yeah.
So I think it does need amending rather than an explanation. That's...
If I can come in, thank you. That would be a very useful recommendation to include from this committee, if you're in agreement to take that forward, and we can feed that. That will go through to the Transport Board when it meets on the 12th of November. So thank you.
Does that need to be a formal proposal, Chair? Or
At the end, we'll
is it
include that
consensus?
as a formal proposal at the end, yeah,
Okay,
if you're happy
thank
with
you.
that.
Thank you.
You mentioned a couple of questions, was that? That's a couple. Any other questions from the floor?
Sorry,
Councillor
so
Pound.
what are we proposing here? Sorry, so what is the actual recommendation here? What are we including?
That there will be a additional paragraph line in the transport funding plan to say that it should consider the strategic priorities of the combined authority.
Okay.
Do you need further clarification?
No,
on
just trying to make sure it's really, really clear in terms of what we're actually recommending to the board, because that's quite
a broad yeah.
thing. You know, they could probably do hundreds of pages on that. You know, is there something specific that we're actually wanting to get? Is it a case of we're looking for return on investment? Is that the primary thing, or is, you know, what are we actually looking for here? I don't.
Councillor Wilson.
What I'm looking for is that when we devise the transport plan, that economic growth is part of the guiding principles of actually developing that transport plan, that's taken into consideration when they're developing the plan. That's what I'm looking for.
So it's similar, for example, so when Highways put forward a proposal where they look at the effect of the economic return, it's effectively that then that you're looking for.
So you're looking for a sort of growth indicator benefit, whereas currently we just look at a net sort of county benefit.
Yeah, so like for example, when Highways put forward a proposal, what they'll do is they'll effectively give you a return, so the level of investment that you're putting in versus the expected return. So I'm assuming it's just similar to that effectively then.
Can I come in if that's at all possible? I think what we're trying to achieve, and just kind of bear with me here, I think what we're trying to achieve is that we consider as one of the criteria of strategic fit that we are looking for schemes and improvements that add value to the greater Lincolnshire economy. I don't think it's a specific measure at this stage about return on investment or leverage for other kind of, you know, finances that's coming through. I think it's being very explicit that we would be prioritising schemes that have an impact on the greater Lincolnshire economy, or improvements, or et cetera, et cetera. If that, Councillor, if that's what the direction of travel. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think the Director's just clarified the matter for me. I would be happy to support that recommendation, because I think we're looking at strategic economic growth rather than specific demonstrations or indicator of economic growth for a particular scheme. So I would be happy to support that recommendation.
Which is why I referred it to the corporate plan, which is coming next, because that will be looking at the holistic improvement of the county. Councillor Park.
Just come back on that. I take your point, I understand now what you're looking at, but I also think that within the transport plan, it's not necessarily just economic growth that's one of the big drivers. It's, as we're all aware, that rural deprivation is a real problem, access to service is a real problem. Helping an elderly lady be able to go down to the GP surgery isn't going to do anything for economic growth, but it is going to do wonders for the people in this area. So it's not necessarily the easiest indicator or maybe the best indicator of what's actually going to help people in terms of economic growth. I take your point, I have to look at it, but I don't think that's necessarily always the biggest thing.
Driver, yeah.
You know, there should be other considerations given to, are we going to improve quality of life for people in Lincolnshire, not just grow the economy? I think that needs to be considered as well in there.
Which does look at, I think it's paragraph 19, which says, outcomes, which would encompasses everybody's comments there. So do we still want a specific line / paragraph in it? We'll put that to Councillor Wilson.
Chair, it's not. I never mentioned that it would be the primary driver, just one of the drivers.
Yeah.
So there'll be other drivers that's been mentioned today. It's an overall thing, but I think it's important when you look at some of the levels of deprivation in the Greater Lincolnshire Authority, that economic driver to help thousands and thousands of people in deprivation is one of the main considerations, and in the language of the reports it should be in there.
Debbie Simpson.
Thank you. If I can just add some of the comments and try and allay your fears a bit. The paper does talk about that we are developing the principles around allocation and prioritisation. One of the things I'll be encouraging is the use of what they call a 5-case model. And it looks at different aspects of schemes, including the context within which they operate. And it's a model that's supported by DFE for the very reasons that members have been talking about, because it looks at the environment that the scheme's going to operate within, which would look at deprivation and things like that. So I think when you see those proposals come forward for how we will prioritise, I think you will see some of that playing into the models that we're going to follow.
The Vice Chair has a question.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's to John or Debbie. What formal process will be implemented to ascertain that funds are exclusively utilised for their intended purposes and that all requisite supporting documentation is systematically recorded? By what means will compliance and the appropriate use of funds be monitored and enforced by both the GLCCA and the constituent authorities to ensure transparency and accountability?
Thank you. So I think this goes back to what I said earlier about having proposals, formal proposals, business cases, and the usual programme management stuff. So we will be looking for detailed project proposals with comprehensive plans, with objectives, outcomes, estimates, timelines. We'll be entering into some sorts of formal agreements, contractual agreements with everybody in terms of what we expect to be delivered, and reporting requirements, compliance expectations and things such as that. Then we'll be sitting some financial controls around that as well, in terms of how people will report, what they'll report and what evidence they'll provide for that. And then of course we'll ensure that we've got an audit trail of everything. So we've got systematic documentation and recording of everything that's been shared with us, so that we can follow up with independent audits to ensure that funds have been spent appropriately.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Does that conclude questions and discussions about this agenda item? So, we're going to, yeah. Propose that the committee has reviewed the report and amendments have been suggested to the author to be made in the final report to take to the Transport Board, and that request the officers of the Transport Board to take into consideration our comments as captured by the Scrutiny Officer, and that we support the recommendations to the Transport Board on the 12th of November 2025 to approve the local transport resource funding for this financial year, subject to the amendments. Will we get the amendments circulated? So, everybody in agreement? Can we have a show of hands? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, which is the GLCCA draft corporate plan, which is on pages 23 to 48 of the agenda pack, is for policy development and sets out the emerging GLCCA corporate plan, which is due for consideration by the authority on the 10th of December 2025. We seek recommendations to the committee to review the draft attached at Annex A and provide comments to the content of the plan. Do we have any questions after it has been presented by Lee over there?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read, but to add a few additional points and considerations to it. So this has been developed as the overarching document to set the strategy for the organisation. As we've just touched on, there will be a number of other documents that sit beneath this and interact with it, including local transport plan, but also including things like employment and skills strategies, investment plans, etc. There will also be the local growth plan that will start to direct where funding and resource goes in the future. So this has been developed in partnership with all of the constituent and non-constituent authorities. We've had around about 120 items of feedback on the early drafts, and the version you are seeing takes into account that feedback that has been received so far. It is due to be presented into the business infrastructure group next week. So we will start to test the narrative further with that group, and we have circulated it with a number of other stakeholders along the way as well. So the intention here is to set a clear narrative, a clear direction of travel, and that should then start to give you the additional clarity in terms of how do other things that you scrutinise link in with the overarching aims of the organisation. As highlighted in the report, it isn't finished. We are testing this with you. We are developing it on its journey to the CCA in December. Clearly, infographics, design, etc. will change. Equally, we'll refine the wording further as the plan develops. But through James, Caroline and I, more than happy to take any questions or comments on the plan as it stands.
To the floor. Are there any questions from any of the councillors? Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Another question, I suppose, in terms of consultation. Will there be further engagement with non-constituent members of the authority?
I'll hand you over to Lee there. I should hope there will be.
Yes, so non-constituent members have been involved in the development of the plan so far. We ran 2 workshops where non-constituent members were in attendance. It's also been circulated to chief execs of each of the non-constituent authorities on the basis that that can then be tested with portfolio holders as appropriate within those organisations. Non-constituent authorities have been feeding back to us, so we've received feedback from them, which again has been incorporated into the plans that you've got, and the intention is to keep circulating the iterations of the document as we move ahead. Clearly, when this is presented into the CCA, non-constituent members sit on that board, so will be involved in the decision-making process as well.
It's quite a bold document, quite encompassing. How are we going to measure success on it?
I'll take that one, Chair. So we intend to develop a performance framework once we've got the corporate plan in place, which will set out how we measure progress against the CCA ambitions. And in the development of that, again, we will take a similar approach. We'll fully engage members in that process, which will follow on from the adoption of the corporate plan. I think it's fair to say that it's likely to look at a set of indicators that will both allow us to look at long-term progress, needle-moving things, but also look at ways in which we can measure impact in a purposeful way so that we're not just counting numbers but also real-world impacts.
And I notice it does link heavily into transport, so it will answer the questions from the previous 2 agenda items. Any other questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you so much. First of all, it does mention on here about the work towards veterans village development, which I think is a fantastic idea for all those involved. I will also mention that if the MOD do decide to close the Prince William of Gloucester Barracks, then that might be an ideal development site. So just keep that in mind. The other question I have is, it does mention about the fact there are plans for 80,000 homes in Lincolnshire, low investment and site viability are slow in delivery. So in terms of what the GLCCA can actually do to increase the speed of delivery, what practical steps can we actually take to do that? Because often the issues are by the developers and their desire to build them. It's quite complicated, that issue. So is there anything that we can practically do to affect that effectively?
Housing in Greater Lincolnshire is a complex issue, isn't it? We have very different kind of housing market areas from, I don't know, Boston through to Stamford, etc., or Lincoln. The work that we've been doing to date in housing has been working with all of the district councils across Greater Lincolnshire and developing and asking indeed for sites for housing development. We have been assessing those sites. We have been working with Homes England, and our intention is to have a housing pipeline. And currently there are 200 sites on that housing pipeline. The intention, however, is to get to a strategic agreement, a strategic partnership with Homes England sometime next year, which means that we will, both organisations, the Combined Authority and Homes England, will be leaning into the development of some of those strategic sites so that we can bring forward some houses and some homes indeed across Greater Lincolnshire. So it's early work at the moment, and it could be that Homes England would be able to provide some funding to unblock some of those sites, or it could be that they could accelerate development and de-risk some of the issues that are multiple, I think, on different kind of sites across Lincolnshire. But at this stage, it would only be working with a handful of sites because, you know, there are issues across some sites across the rest of kind of Greater Lincolnshire. So it probably would narrow it down to working with 5 sites across kind of Lincolnshire to take forward some of those developments. Other things that we can do, we have now got a full-time kind of housing officer joined the Combined Authority a week ago, and they are looking at understanding the state of the housing market, what the barriers are, what some of the opportunities are, and some of them are quite complex, and they go into areas such as skills or energy or infrastructure or water or just labour force. So I think, you know, it's a piece of work that needs to be examined over a period of time, but we are looking at some short-term wins working with Homes England.
Yep. Thank you so much. I appreciate how difficult the housing situation is, and I think often, probably what a lot of us have found, that when we see these new housing developments come up, the concern the constituents have is around the critical infrastructure, things like sewage, access to GP surgeries, schools. It's very, very complicated when you're looking at building tens of thousands of houses. So a GLCCA in a position where we can ensure that we're factoring in the critical infrastructure required alongside the housing developments to make sure that residents get the services that they need if these housing developments do go ahead.
So obviously we're not the housing authorities, and this doesn't replace any work that is being undertaken at a district level or at any other particular level in terms of critical infrastructure. So this is a space where all partners will work together. On the sites that we may develop with Homes England, that would obviously be factored into some of those sites. The other work, which is not housing related but is incredibly important, is the Business and Infrastructure Board and the work of the Business and Infrastructure Board. One of their main focuses will be looking at critical infrastructure. And again, another complicated subject of how do we get infrastructure in the right places at the right time to accelerate economic growth. And that's not just about housing, that's commercial growth as well. So that is a line of work that's being examined by the Business and Infrastructure Group.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. First a comment and then a sort of question or what have you. So, beginning of the plan, the forwards have not been completed for us to look at. That sets a strategic sort of nuances to the plan. So it's a bit disappointing that they weren't ready for this meeting. However, my sort of question stroke comment is on the indicative infographics. I don't know what page it is. Page 38. it's only while people are looking, it's only a sort of minor question, but not question, comment, I suppose. That when you look at infographics like that, usually you compare like for like. So when you've got like 6 boxes, and you've got how many people are employed in 4 of them, and then 2 of them haven't, it's like, why? You know, it's just not good optics, I think. You know, we should have a common theme going through them. So more of a comment.
Any response?
I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, absolutely take the point. And again, these are indicative infographics for the purposes of demonstrating what we might be showing in there, but we will make sure that when they are put into the final document, we'll have the relevant comparison between different sectors, etc., notwithstanding the fact that some sectors are quite difficult to define because of the way in which government coding works and that sort of thing, but we will do our best to make sure they are consistent across the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Davison.
Yeah, well, previous speaker actually touched on what I was going to say with regards to homes and houses. At the moment, I think most authorities are in the position of having ripped up their local plans due to the new housing targets. So we're kind of in a rather grey area at the moment. And one thing we're finding, and I think it's important if we've got any influence at all as a big tier authority, to have some control over the housing mix, have some control over 106. Many developers now are actually rigging and out of 106. It's a broken system. So not the least that they're not going to build a doctor's surgery anyway. They're not going to provide this. They want to build lots and lots of houses, but they don't want to put the infrastructure in, and they don't even want to fund 106 anymore. So there's a big job to do really in deciding and having influence on that, I think, lobbying government to see if we can change the system in terms of infrastructure. And also housing types. We're seeing, I don't know, I call them Peppa Pig world. The housing that we're seeing being developed now with no facility, cheek by jowl, 3-storey, quite horrendous. We don't want to see this sort of housing in Lincolnshire, in my opinion, certainly. And we have a big issue with older people living in large houses. Why are they staying in large houses? There aren't sufficient bungalows for them to move into. So again, influence. Developers don't want to build bungalows. They want to build 4-bedroom detached houses where they're going to make the most profit. And that's not even talking about the affordable element. So I think we need to be very clear on, you know, the government's given us some clear guidance. They want thousands of houses building. We do need more houses, but we really need to have some tight control over the what, where and how and the infrastructure. So I think this report needs to make good reference to that as much as possible. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chair.
Another one. On page 45, it mentions that nearly 1 in 4 working-age people in Greater Lincolnshire are economically inactive. What actions will be taken to raise aspiration, participation and attainment in learning and employment, particularly among the economically inactive groups?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in priority number 11, we do specifically reference aspiration, inspiration and confidence to participate in learning and employment. The sort of corresponding outcome that we've tied to that does have the aim of lifting average skill level attainment above the national average. But we do also acknowledge within the narrative that accompanies that section the challenge of reducing the economically inactive population. I can refer to my colleague Claire Hughes if you want some more information about the types of activities we might look at as part of that priority.
Thank you, Chair. The paper that we're going to look at next will talk about the Adult Skills Fund that's going to be devolved to the area, and we'll be looking at the different types of training, confidence building and helping people to take on work in the future. So we can talk about that more in the next agenda item.
I must admit I was going to link the targets for housing to it's pointless building houses if nobody can afford to buy them. Having taught at North Links College when it was North Links College to try and improve and try and recruit people to be electricians, plumbers, etc. Yeah, there are jobs. but we've got to address the fact that they're not either trained or do not want to do them. So that's the reason, you know, it's yeah, so that needs to be addressed by this and the next one about the skills fund. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. In the priorities, I'm just wondering where manufacturing and ports and logistics come into the priority list. There's no specific mention of it, yet there's specific mention of food security, energy security and defence, AI and data. So within the plan, it talks about creating better paid jobs and more jobs. So I'm wondering where that section is, because I think that's like one of the most important sections that there would be to create those more well-paid jobs.
In the infographics, it mentions advanced manufacturing.
Yeah, but not in the priorities. That's what I'm saying. Chair.
Yes. I did listen with some dismay that we'd disengaged with the Nuclear Disposals Authority, because they, as they proved in Suffolk, bring in vast numbers of jobs. So why we've disengaged with that is an own goal in my opinion, but that's just my opinion.
But in a strategic job document,
we should be highlighting those very things. Yeah.
So do we need to take that on board, or do we need to make another recommendation that
I'll hand you over to?
Thank you, Chair. So if I may, so in priority number 8, in the Better Connected section, so that one specifically refers to ports and logistics. The priority itself is around supporting more effective movement of goods and services. And within the narrative, we talk about a sector development plan for ports and logistics and looking at ways of improving how our connectivity can support better movement of goods around the county and in and out of the region, both nationally and internationally. So we're happy to have another look at the wording if you feel that's not strong enough or clear enough. But we do definitely reference that at the moment. In terms of manufacturing, we touch on advanced manufacturing within the first theme. So where we talk about some of the priority sectors there and the areas of focus that we feel we've got strategic priorities for, we do cover advanced manufacturing in the narrative there. But again, we can look at strengthening the wording if you feel it's not clear enough. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, I think we do need to strengthen the wording, because this is a public-facing document. So people don't know, people aren't going to go, right, what other documents are there? So it needs to be clear, plain English of what the priorities are. It doesn't want to be inferenced.
Yes, I think there's a nodded agreement that there will be amendments. Any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. Food security. And the one thing I've gone through the document, but I can't find the page I was looking for. With Lincolnshire basically being used as a conduit for the rest of the country for electricity in some way, shape or form. And I mean by that, I mean pylons, I mean obviously wind farms and solar panels. We talk about food security. However, there seems to be a massive drive to convert thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of farmland and use them for solar farms. So it's okay having a plan, but that plan's going to be ripped up by the NSIPs that are basically being pushed forward. What are the officer's thoughts on that? Because we've obviously got lots of ideas of how to move the county forward, but you talk about food security, and yet there's certain things that are pulling it in a different direction.
So it's a complicated space, isn't it? We need power to be able to grow an economy. We need water connectivity, as we discussed with housing earlier. In order to achieve some of those outcomes, there needs to be infrastructure in place. And we are working with national government and their agencies around how that can be done in a considerate way. and I think the Mayor's been proactive in her response to that. The food security part isn't purely about traditional farming methods, it's about innovation. So this links in part to the innovation strategy work in terms of how do we support our businesses to be more innovative, get greater yield, be more productive. And certainly through the devolution deal, we got agreement to work with DEFRA to support businesses and business growth. Now, clearly, the Combined Authority has a role of lobbying. It has a role to be able to put views forward from the area back to government. Hence, it's our challenge. And indeed, we've been discussing that this morning with another organisation in the way that they work. But it's a complex mix. So we need to showcase what Lincolnshire offers. The corporate plan is part of that process. We need to work with national government departments to get the innovation and investment into those areas and really get the understanding of what a rural area brings. But we need to do that in a balanced way against other needs. So I don't think there's a kind of golden bullet to solve it. I think it's a complicated space that a number of policies will interact into.
Comfortable with that answer?
I've also got another question as well about the housing developments. I'm actually a mortgage broker, and I have done mortgages for 30 years, and I've never known so few schemes or so few incentives to actually try and buy any new properties. We can build thousands and thousands and thousands of homes, but people have to buy them. And at the moment, the market is on not a very, very good trajectory. So my question is there anything we can do to try, and perhaps not, perhaps I've gone over the remit of coming out with some schemes, housing schemes, to get first-time buyers on the market, because there's no Help to Buy anymore. There's only shared ownership. And is there anything that we can put in place to try and help? There's also different other schemes where people in armed forces may have some extra scheme, any nurses, doctors or anything. But we need something in place, because quite simply, all these houses will be built and nobody will actually buy them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it is part of the development that we will take part of when we next think about our housing priorities. So as I outlined before, we're working with Homes England, we're looking at some initial kind of strategic sites, but developing housing and homes for people is a real balance between supply and demand, isn't it? And the environment into which it works with. I talked about kind of access to skills, I talked about kind of labour. It's also about the right mix, which members have spoken to about before. We will develop, and we are going to develop, now we have our full-time housing resource, an outline kind of housing strategy for treating housing as a sector. So we're not the housing authorities, we're not kind of giving and planning permission in that particular way. But what we can do is think through what does the marketplace look like and what interventions that we need to make through in there. And from that, we will have to take evidence and then develop some actions. Some of those actions might be within our gift, but many of them aren't. Many of them that you refer to are about lobbying government for particular things. They might be working with the supply chain to make sure there's a certainty of supply of land coming through, or certainty of opportunities. Working with Homes England, who sometimes do intervene with housing companies around financing and de-risking. So I think there might be a multiple of elements within that, but certainly it is our intention to start thinking about the conditions for creating a housing market. But many of the levers won't be within our our levers that we have or jurisdiction.
Any further questions about the corporate plan in its draft form? So I propose that the committee has reviewed the draft corporate plan as attached and request that the officers take into consideration the comments and feedback that have come from the floor and ones that have been captured by the scrutiny officer to inform the next iteration of the draft. Could we have a show of hands if we agree? Again, unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, which is a report on the devolution of the Adult Skills Fund. This report, again, is for policy development and is on pages 49 to 150 of the agenda pack. It provides an overview of the devolution of Adult Skills Fund for due for consideration by the GLCCA, again on the 10th of December. We'd be asking for recommendations to the committee to review and provide feedback on the ambitions and strategic priorities of the Adult Skills Funds set out in the report, section 9, a draft AF skills plan, skills funding strategic skills plan, Annex B, the commissioning plan set out in the strategic skills, Annex B, pages 145 to 146, and draft changes to the funding rules and performance in Annex A. Any comments will be captured by our scrutiny officer, but I will at this moment ask for Claire Hughes to provide an overview of it.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth just giving you a bit of an introduction to the Adult Skills Fund. That's the largest of the government budgets for training for adults. And that's what we're currently preparing for the devolution of for delivery at the start of August in 2026. So that seems quite a long time away, but actually we're required by the Secretary of State to prepare a number of documents, and we have to assure the Secretary of State that we are going to be able to manage this budget in the way that it has been managed previously, and that we can continue to support our residents with the sort of training that this budget is intended for, which is very much for lower, for people who have lower level qualifications and are trying to achieve qualifications to get them into work or to progress within the workplace. We will be required to publish a set of funding rules which have been provided for you in draft, and we are also required to show government how we intend to commission the budget, which we expect, although we don't know how much it will be until probably around January, we expect it to be in the region of around £18 million a year. What we do know through the devolution deal that we will receive 1.4% of the national budget, but that hasn't been agreed yet, and that's usually set every year. It hasn't changed a huge amount over the last 10 years, but it was reduced by 6% last year. So the report sets out the authority's ambitions and priorities, which have been approved by the Employment and Skills Board, but they were actually produced and worked with all of the constituent authorities and district authorities over the last 12 months since the authority has existed, but actually before the combined authority existed as well. This work has been going on for quite some time. So the report also sets out a number of changes that are going to be considered in terms of those funding rules for the first year. So in addition to adopting the national rules, which, as you can see from your pack, they're around 63 pages long, the national rules, which do seem extremely complicated, but there are very good reasons for that. It is public money and it needs to be managed in the appropriate way. And so the report sets out a number of changes that are being proposed at the moment, and we're working through an assessment of those before presenting them to the main authority board on the 10th of December. The report also sets out the accompanying draft strategic plan. This is a wordy. It is the Adult Skills Fund Strategic Skills Plan. We'll call it SSP for short. That is the required name by the Department for Education. It is an operational plan, if you like. It's how are we going to administer the fund. So it sets out a little bit of background. It sets out some of the evidence base, and it sets out how we intend to commission it, and it will have the final priorities in there. I think there's a lot of information that you've got here, and I think this is a long-term fund. This is something as part of the devolution deal that we will have powers and funding from the Secretary of State, and we don't expect to make all of the changes in year one. We will expect to make small and impactful changes every year so that over a period of time we can make sure that this fund works for us. think at that point I'll pass back to you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll open it up to the floor. Councillor Davison first.
Yeah, as you say, it's weighty tone. Just focusing on something that caught my eye, which is on your little chart of, what's it entitled? Draft policy changes in year 1. Item 7 seems to indicate we're not going to teach people English. I hope I'm wrong, but it's a bit unclear to me. It says, what's the actual wording here? Not specifically through ESOL courses. So would you like to explain what the thought is behind it? My view is it's essential that people that come to settle here have a good grasp of English, the English language. So teaching them that is a key priority for me, certainly.
So the Employment and Skills Board have discussed, and when they met, that they want to make sure that the training that's provided to people is inclusive, and that they want to ensure that speakers of other languages are able to find training in other ways. And what we're doing at the moment is to explore an assessment of that and how that might impact residents.
Content? Not really. Yeah.
If you want to settle in the United Kingdom and England, having a grasp of English is absolutely essential for you to fully integrate into our society, to be able to go to the hospitals, to doctors, and I wouldn't like to see that watered down. I understand inclusivity, but we all know we've got areas within our own constituencies where people do not, will not, and have not spoken English. And I don't think that's acceptable. Sorry. Thank you.
We can certainly make that note and make sure that's noted at the main authority meeting in December.
Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, thank you so much. A couple of points, if I may. First of all, this is a wonderful paper, by the way. I think the opportunity to help deliver skills to people in Lincolnshire is brilliant. It's great. Obviously, we're going to be engaging a lot of external partners for a lot of this training, I would have thought. Is there a metric by way we can try and prioritise Lincolnshire-based providers so that we can obviously provide jobs to people in Lincolnshire? Is that something that we can proactively do?
If I may, I think if we are looking to support and train people who haven't got qualifications, then it's shown that often is best done face-to-face, and so we would absolutely want to support local providers.
Yeah, because I know obviously often you can have providers come in to an environment to teach them, but obviously the more local, the more benefits it gives to everyone in Lincolnshire, more jobs for locals, so that's brilliant. I think it's great. I also think the HGV training course is a wonderful idea as well. I think that's a fantastic idea. One of the concerns that I have, it mentions on page 85, it talks about learners with learning difficulties and or disabilities. So it mentions that the Adult Skills Fund doesn't fund learning for learners aged 19 to 24 who have an EHCP. It must be done through the DfE 16 to 19 funding. That leaves a gap for people over the age of 19, unless I'm mistaken.
Okay, forgive me, this is going to be slightly out of my technical remit, but I believe what that is intended to say is that the Adult Skills Fund doesn't support those people because they are included within the other funding, so nobody is excluded. It's that the Adult Skills Fund doesn't support that group. They are excluded because they are supported elsewhere. I'm very happy to come back with further information on that, and I will make it clearer in the
Yeah,
report.
if that's okay,
Yeah.
just because I think it doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
make sense in the wording.
They're definitely not excluded. It's just that they're not included in this fund.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just trying to understand the wording.
Thank you.
That's fine, not a problem. The only other point I want to make is on page 90, it also refers to job outcome payments. So would you be able to just to explain how that actually works in this scenario, if that's okay?
Just let me find page 90. Is this part of the funding rules?
I believe so.
Normally, job outcome payments, it's a term that tends to be used. It's a term that tends to be used with employment and skills schemes, whereby providers aren't paid until the learner achieves a job outcome. That's usually the case. And I think as this is within the funding rules, it's probably referring to whether or not there would be any job outcome payments. It's not usual within the Adult Skills Fund. It's very usual within schemes like skills boot camps and what are generally recognised as welfare to work payments. That's what that relates to. It's very jargonised, and again, perhaps we can make some of these things less jargonised, if that's a word.
I think that makes sense to me now. I think it's just when it's put down there, obviously in wording, just trying to understand what the practical reality actually suggests, that's all. But no, that's great, thank you.
I can give you an example of practical reality. We had an apprentice plumber. We had to physically show him fitting a urinal to the college tutor so they could document it and get funding for that part of the course. So they were very keen to actually get to make sure he'd done it as a vehicle to get people to finish courses, do key bits of those courses. It is, dare I say it, almost priceless, because it focuses the mind of the trainee and the training body. Yeah, no. Any other questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. A comment first. I mean, it's a big document, and with all the other documents, it's been difficult to get through all these within the timescales, with the emails sent. For example, I work and we've got other council duties as well and family things. So I think there's been quite a lot to read this time, and I hope that the officers can be aware that we've all got pressures and some of us don't do counselling full time. Having said that, so I might have missed a bit in this big document that I'm caveating it, and so I'd like the officers to explain. I was quite excited when we was talking about devolved powers, and particularly about the skills. I was quite excited about that, because I thought, well, actually we could tailor the skills to our area. Can you explain how this document tailors the training to the skills we need and to the jobs that we hope to create, how it all fits in together? Because I haven't got that from it.
Yeah, and fits in with your bit about manufacturing. Yeah. So I'll hand you over to Claire Hughes, please.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point. At the very beginning of the strategic skills plan, that big plan, it talks about a number of different evidence bases. Because we're a new authority, but also because we've got a relatively new government, there is a lot of new skills policy and a lot of new skills plans and evidence being written very much at the same time. And there's something called a local skills improvement plan, which will start to be written over the next coming months, which government gives an award to the Federation of Small Business, actually, in Lincolnshire, to work with employers to understand what those skills gaps are over the next 3 years. Now, that's not to say we don't know where there are skills gaps at the moment, but this will be a fresh evidence base. In addition, we will have the evidence base from the local growth plan, and we are working at the moment on getting the current data that has been delivered by colleges and training providers about what they have actually delivered over the last year, because we don't have that information yet. And we need to triangulate all of that to do exactly what you're saying, because that's the holy grail, isn't it? We absolutely need to be able to change this scheme to make sure that we are giving the right sort of skills and training to the people who live here so that they can actually apply for and be successful in getting the jobs that we want them to. So that is absolutely the aim, and I'd be really happy to get advice from you on where we should put that into the document, given that it's such a big document. Should we put that up front in a forward or in an introduction?
Please, yeah.
Chair, I think with every document, I think its intended purposes outlines what what language should be spoken and where it should go. So if it's an internal document, it'll be corporate speak and such like. If it's an external document like that, the authority plan that we looked at earlier, it should be more plain English. So where it should go at the moment, I don't know. That was a bit of a officer answer, wasn't it? But I've got another question, Chair.
Please do, yeah.
It's just on one part that I read. I've been looking for the page, but I can't find it, but I read it. And it says about training providers only being provided for money and being commissioned if they've got a head office in Lincolnshire.
Which goes back to Councillor Parkinson's.
So, again, I'm not sure that that's a good guiding principle. There might be training providers that are doing a wonderful job, better than others, but their head office is just outside of Lincolnshire and they don't qualify. I don't understand why we would commit to that. I think that, you know, you need to look at the establishment, what they're doing and you know, how they're performing for our residents rather than where the head office is. I don't really get that.
Well, can I hijack part of your question? Your 1.4% of the national budget for adults, skills training, etc., concerns me because it, to a humble opinion, seems to imply that Lincolnshire's being shortchanged. You look at the diversity which was mentioned on housing and transport of a county this size. How do we do a one-size-fits-all on a training one? And the document, as everybody said, is very good. But to then put the onus on us to then measure the outcomes of that, whilst handicapping you by saying there are limits to who you can use, seems to be putting 8 people in front of the goals. So I support your comment there.
So I'm going to leave the bit about 1.4% to
Oh, no, yes, it's
because
outside
I know
this.
that was something that was discussed in the devolution deal. So in the current training system, in the way that the Department for Education currently allocate their funding, they distribute some money by means of a grant, and they do that to further education colleges, to local authorities, and to 1 or 2 other organisations that are specially designated. In order to make, and then the rest of the money they procure through a fully procured process. One of the things that the Secretary of State needs assurance of when we take over this fund is that we don't suddenly cause a shock to the training sector and that we don't suddenly change money from one to the other and have a big further education college, for example, fall over. Not least because, certainly from our perspective, they support a lot of our 16 to 18-year-olds, and although we're not involved in funding that, it is absolutely important that they don't suddenly have a huge financial shock. So the way we intend to do it actually mirrors the way other combined authorities have done it over the last 10 years, is to make change slowly. And so the commissioning plan that's set out in the strategic plan says that we will allocate a grant to organisations that have got a head office or a significant operating base within Greater Lincolnshire, and the rest will be procured as it is now. So there's no intention not to award money to local organisations. It's just that there is a 2-tier system actually at the moment. Does that help?
Any other questions? Oh, of course you can.
Something that I don't know whether it should be in this strategic document or not, but I would like to see in there somewhere about prior learning and funding. And what I mean by that, but I'm trying not to be too specific, that, you know, somebody that comes away from school with some qualifications might be taken by a college on level 1 when they've already got level 2 qualifications, and it's no good for the learner, and it needs to be not funded in my view. It needs to be the right courses for the right people type situation. I don't know how it would go into a strategic document like this, but I think it needs to be put in.
Very happy to put something in, because the statistics that I've been able to access, again, we don't have all the full information, but from a year before last, which is the last full year of data, it is quite concerning about how many people have actually got a level 6 or equivalent to a degree who have had training using this funding. Now, there are lots of caveats with that, because there are a whole host of reasons why that might happen, but we do want to try and explore it further, so very happy to put something in the report.
Councillor Wilson again.
Sorry, Chair, another question. So some funding is linked to unemployment and things like that. What about economic inactivity? So somebody that isn't claiming any benefits, but they want to get into work, how's that funded?
Anybody can answer that one. Claire.
Anybody who is they would be eligible for training through this budget if they are unemployed, whether they've got benefits or not.
Thank you. Any other Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Just come back to the point on asking councillors, obviously, for their input. Would it be worth speaking to the partners at the county council and district councils for either a public consultation or to consult their elected members on what they feel be important, just to feed back into GLCCA, just for feedback purposes? Would there be any benefit to that?
In terms of what specifically?
So in terms of what, as you mentioned, around councillors saying in my area, I feel that there would be a specific need for this skill set. Well, obviously we need to ask the question in order for you to know that. So whether there'd be any benefit in either a public consultation coming from either the district or the county council, or whether we just effectively consult all of the elected members and say, for feedback purposes, what do you feel are the key needs in your constituency? At least then you can feed back into the GLCCA and say, this is what we feel is important, and you can use that to help develop the plan so it's more tailored. Is there any benefit in that at all?
Are you happy for me to?
Yeah, I was just trying to find the bit. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere in the report.
We do have a lot of existing information from work with all of the constituent partners and with all of the districts actually, and so I've actually worked with a lot of your officers over a number of years, and do have a lot of that information, but actually doing this today and with the Employment Skills Board and with the authority meeting, I would hope that that information could also be provided. But thank you.
I thought there was a bit about stakeholder involvement, so yeah, there's a lot in there. Any other questions from the floor? I propose therefore that the committee has reviewed the draft authority funding rules and performance framework and the ASF strategic skills plans, and request that officers and the GLCA take out into consideration the comments and feedback as captured by the Scrutiny Office when finalising the document. I think we've got most of the items. Can we raise our hands if people agree? That's 6. Any against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. So it is agreed. Thank you very much. Move on to the final part, final agenda item, which are items 151 to 160 on the agenda pack, which is consideration of the GLCCA overview and scrutiny committee work programme. Hopefully, if it's done right, we'll address Councillor Wilson's view about not having huge reams of paperwork before meetings. So the recommendation to the committee are to review and agree the committee's work programme as set out in the report, highlight for discussion any additional scrutiny items which could be considered for inclusion in this work programme. The report will be presented by Tracy Johnson. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The committee's next meeting is on the 28th of January. Currently, we have 2 items listed, which will be one around the GLCCA budget setting from Debbie, and also one relating to the Treasury Management Policy, which again will be from Debbie, and both of those will then be considered by the GLCCA on the 25th of February meeting. I'm also aware that potentially might be a couple of other financial items in relation to the medium-term financial plan that might also come along, so there might be a few more items before we get to that meeting. I also just like to remind members of the informal budget briefing for the committee. This is on Friday, the 28th of November at 10 o'clock on Microsoft Teams, so hopefully we'll see you all there for that. I'm happy to make any suggestions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I would say to all members that if there's any item that they think needs bringing to the Scrutiny Committee, please alert the officers or myself, because we are to look at, scrutinise anything rather than just what's put before us. Any questions about the plan? 2. Councillor Wilson.
Chair, we've discussed a lot in the last 2 meetings, and I'm wondering whether we should have an item, a regular item, like a tracking item on, how things are progressing, whether that's by exception or just a quick update on how these transport plans going, how the corporate plans going, and the progress being made, so that we can perhaps in the future, not call in is the wrong word, but look
call
at,
in is the correct word.
Yeah, call in things where we think, oh, actually, that's not where we was expecting it to be.
Quite a few of the items are coming back to the Scrutiny Committee every quarter to ascertain progress. Quite a few of the items are embedded in that aspect for us to look at it anyway. So that process is already partially in process, but it's a new authority and that's been sort of set in place. There are one item's been asked to be sort of looked at in confidence, so that will be brought back at some point. So yes, we hear what you say, and that's already in action, is it not?
If I may, so yes, we will bring things back to you. So part of the reason you've got a pack of this size is the stage of development of the organisation. So there are things we need to take through a formal process to be approved to move on to the next stage. And that's particularly the case for adult skills, as Claire highlighted. Clearly, things like the local transport plan, we will bring that back to you at regular intervals as it iterates along. And then when we look at things like the corporate plan, we will start to develop a performance framework for the corporate plan. And then the expectation would be you're engaged in the development of that framework, but you'll also then be engaged in the scrutiny of that framework. So you will start to get, through the natural development of the organisation, exposure to the work that the organisation is doing, and at very least on a quarterly basis, you're then considering the performance of the organisation in that way. So it will build, and it will start to change shape and look more like you're used to from a district or a unitary authority perspective in terms of that rhythm of information coming through to you. So that is very much the intention to get to that point.
Yeah.
Well, if I take that on board, therefore, can I ask that the scrutiny papers, when they're produced, actually give us details on our recommendations, and so we don't have to read the full plan to try and find where, give us an outline of when we've made a recommendation or things noted, how it's been exercised.
Aside from being
as part
outside
of the
the minutes as well.
Yeah, so if you're coming back every quarter and we've made some recommendations today, part of the scrutiny paper would then say this recommendation's been put onto page 25 of that plan or whatever.
Officers, is that?
Sorry,
I did
thank you,
see the
Chairman.
hand. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Chairman. What we could do is look at putting together like an action plan, which I can attach as part of the work programme. So the items that have come through the committee, I can then say where we've had recommendations, like we had a couple today from different items, we can then say that they were considered by the relevant board or whatever, and then whether that's been taken into account or anything, like any feedback that came out of that meeting. So I could definitely put together just an action plan following up from each of the committee meetings to highlight what's happened since. So I can look at doing that. And to go back to Lee's point in terms of the performance, the corporate plan, performance reporting, they'll be coming through on a quarterly basis. And I think the plan is for the first quarter to be for the July meeting. So you will be having the quarterly performance, and I think there will also be quarterly performance on the finance as well side of things. So as we get going, there will be starting to come through once it's all been approved and agreed. So to reassure you.
Any other comments? Councillor Mitchell.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to propose accepting the recommendation as drafted in the report, but I'm certainly happy to agree with the amendment suggested by my colleague in terms of the updates.
Any other questions, comments? Put it to a vote. Show of hands, please. Unanimous. Thank you very much for your time. Concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for your time. See you in January in the new year. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Well, just hope it's not just hope there's not a resurgence of COVID, otherwise you might be in trouble for having a cake.